Now to the results of two high-stakes elections sending political shockwaves across the country. A Democratic judge in Wisconsin has won a crucial Supreme Court seat, flipping control of the state's highest court. And a progressive candidate has claimed victory in Chicago's mayoral runoff. Senior White House correspondent Mary Bruce has the latest. Hey, Mary.
Yeah, two very telling races overnight. Let's start in Wisconsin, where liberal judge Janet Protasevich has now flipped the state's conservative Supreme Court. This is a very big victory for abortion rights. It means that the state court could reverse Wisconsin's ban on abortion. They could also end the use of gerrymandered legislative maps, which have given Republicans commanding control of the state's legislature. Now, of course, state Supreme Court races like this don't usually garner this kind of national attention, but this one is having a huge impact on the future of a very key battleground state. And it also became the most expensive judicial race in our nation's history, with more than $40 million spent. Now over to Chicago, where we saw a big victory for progressives in the Democratic Party. Brandon Johnson, a former teacher and union organizer, is now set to become Chicago's next mayor. This was a close race, but Johnson had the backing of the teachers union. He was promising to invest in the city's schools and social programs. He'd also vowed to address the root causes of crime in the city, while his opponent was more focused on promising additional policing. Kira.
Join me now for more context. ABC News political director Rick Klein. So, Rick, let's start in Chicago. Newly elected mayor Brandon Johnson was a teacher before running for office. He was endorsed by the Chicago Teachers Union. Let's talk about how big of a role that played in rallying the voters, especially given former Mayor Lori Lightfoot's series of standoffs, as we know, with the city's teachers union.
That's right, and Lightfoot lost in the first round of voting to these two other fellow Democrats, but Johnson and Vallas, much different Democrats. Johnson came up through the ranks as a teacher and then as a labor organizer for teachers' unions. Paul Vallas actually ran the school system, but he did it with a finance background, not an education background. And Vallas also had the backing of the most powerful police union in the city of Chicago. A lot of more moderate and conservative voters were going toward him. A lot of questions in this about how schools should have handled COVID, how they're handling the learning environment in this new era with so many other issues on the plate and issues around crime and criminal justice. There were even warnings that if Johnson won, there might be a mass resignation of Chicago police officers. Nothing like that seen, at least so far, but there were some raw emotions and some of the most powerful interests in the city were up against each other, and a big win for the more progressive candidate in Johnson.
Right, and then one of the biggest issues in the race, right? Crime and policing, as we've talked a lot about in Chicago. So how did Johnson's stance compare to that of his rival?
Yeah, you saw Johnson was taking a position. He was trying to sand away some of the edges, but he was associated with the defund the police movement, even though he said he definitely would not be defunding the police. But he was seen as someone that was much more sympathetic to some of the police reforms that we've seen in many major cities nationwide. Vallas hit the crime issue hard and was reminding people, particularly in the more upscale neighborhoods of Chicago, about the scourge of crime and about the violence that has been happening in Chicago's streets. Knowing that Mayor Lightfoot was part of some of the most chaotic times that we've seen in recent memory there, he was trying to take advantage of that and take advantage of the sentiments around that and use that as something of a wedge. And you even had a lot of people saying that Vallas was kind of running as the candidate of the MAGA right, even though he identifies as a Democrat and had many Democrats behind him. I'll tell you, Democrats are looking at Johnson's victory as a little bit of a window of how you can prevail, at least in more liberal parts of the country, and thread a needle around policing.
So moving to the high-stakes elections in Wisconsin now, a Democrat-backed judge flipped the critical swing state's highest court for the first time in, 15 years? So let's just talk about how heavy of a loss this is for Republicans, and what do you think actually went wrong for the party?
Yeah, it's a staggering defeat for Republicans, and in part because the issues are so big, talking about things like abortion rights and the future of voting rights on the line. Conservatives had this very narrow majority. It didn't always work in their favor. Technically, these are nonpartisan positions, but we saw tens of millions of dollars dumped into this race because people know that this is a big battleground state and that the Supreme Court gets as partisan as it does. And you had the more liberal candidate who was saying about as explicitly as you can without saying it as a judge that she'd be sympathetic to some of the Democratic interests, and you had the conservative candidate saying quite the opposite. Very striking to me to see in defeat the conservative candidate say he wasn't going to be conceding defeat because he didn't feel like he had a worthy opponent. He said, "Good luck, Wisconsin." This was more than just raw emotions. This was like almost two prize fighters that you say at the end of the match they flat out don't like each other.
Rick Klein. Thanks for following it all for us today.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.